Welcome back to East Meets Swiss. Usually, when we talk about work, we talk about careers. We talk about finding the right company, getting promoted, changing jobs, earning more money, finding a better manager, or perhaps even moving to another country. But today, I want to talk about a slightly different idea. What if improving your working life does not always require changing your job? What if sometimes we can change the job we already have? And this brings me to the topic of today's episode, job crafting. I find this concept fascinating because it connects work with a much larger question that I increasingly want to explore in this podcast. How can we build a positive life with the circumstances that we have? Of course, we should have ambitions. We should change things when they need to be changed. Sometimes leaving a job is absolutely the right decision, but life cannot always be about waiting for the next situation, the next company, the next promotion, the next project, the next salary increase, the next country. Because if happiness always exists somewhere in the future, we risk spending a very large part of our lives waiting for it. Job crafting offers another perspective. It asks, what can I change about my work today? Not everything, but perhaps something. And sometimes something is enough to make a surprisingly large difference. The concept of job crafting comes from organizational psychology. The basic idea is actually quite simple. Most of us receive a job description when we start a job. It tells us our responsibilities, our tasks, our organizational position, perhaps our reporting line. But if you observe people doing the same job, you quickly notice something interesting. They don't necessarily experience the same job in the same way. Two engineers can have exactly the same title and work in the same department. One might see the job mainly as solving technical problems. The other might become the person who connects different departments. Another might enjoy teaching younger colleagues. Another might become fascinating with improving processes. And someone else might particularly enjoy talking to customers and understanding what they actually need. Officially, they may all have similar jobs, but psychologically, they have started creating slightly different jobs for themselves. That is job crafting. Instead of seeing a job as something completely fixed, we recognize that there is often a certain amount of flexibility inside it. And we can use this flexibility intentionally. Job crafting is often described in three dimensions. The first is task crafting. This means changing where possible what you actually do. Imagine that you are an engineer and you notice that you particularly enjoy data analysis. Perhaps nobody tells you. You are now responsible for data analysis. But you start using data more frequently in your projects. You create a dashboard, you automate an analysis, you develop a better way of visualizing test results. Eventually, colleagues start coming to you because they know that you are good at it. A small interest has slowly become a part of your professional identity. You haven't changed your job, but you have changed your job a little bit. Of course, there are limits. You cannot simply stop doing tasks that you dislike. Job crafting is not, I don't like writing documentation, so from tomorrow I won't do it anymore. That probably won't go very well. It is about finding the flexibility that actually exists within your role. Perhaps 10% of your job can be shaped, maybe 20%, sometimes only 5%. But even that can matter. The second dimension is relationship crafting. And I think this one is often underestimated. Our experience at work depends enormously on the people around us. Think about the difference between spending 8 hours surrounded by people you trust, respect, and enjoy talking to, and spending 8 hours feeling isolated. The technical work might be exactly the same, but the experience is completely different. Relationship crafting means consciously shaping the social side of your work. Maybe there is a colleague from another department whose perspective you find interesting. Talk to that person more often. Maybe there is a younger engineer who could benefit from your experience. Help them. Maybe there is someone with 20 years of experience from whom you could learn. Ask questions. Maybe you are working intentionally, internationally, and there is someone in China, Vietnam, Switzerland, Germany, or somewhere else whose work connects with yours. Instead of communicating only when a problem appears, build a relationship. And this is where job crafting connects beautifully with one of the recurring themes of East Meets Swiss. I mean, culture. Because relationships at work are shaped by culture. In Switzerland, professional relationships can sometimes initially feel quite structured. There is often respect for boundaries, responsibilities, and personal space. In many Asian environments, relationships can play a stronger role in creating trust before business happens. Of course, these are broad tendencies, and individuals are different. But working across cultures can teach us something valuable. Work is never only about tasks, it is also about relationships. And if we consciously improve those relationships, we may improve the job itself. There is also another aspect here that I personally find fascinating. Language. When people discover that they share a language, something can change almost immediately. Maybe two colleagues usually communicate in English. Then suddenly they discover that both speak Vietnamese, or Chinese, or French, or Swiss German. The relationship changes. There can suddenly be humor, small cultural references, a different emotional connection. Language can create belonging, and belonging can change how we experience our workplace. So, even something as simple as having lunch with different colleagues, joining another professional community, or speaking someone's native language can be a form of relationship crafting. You are changing the social environment of your job. The third dimension is perhaps the most interesting. It is called cognitive crafting. This means changing the way you think about the purpose of your work. And this is where job crafting becomes much bigger than career development. Imagine someone who works in manufacturing. One way of describing the job could be I maintain production equipment. That is technically correct, but another description could be I make sure that hundreds of people can produce reliable products every day. Or imagine someone developing software for industrial equipment. They could say, I write code. Or I make complex technology easier and safer for people to use. The tasks haven't changed. The salary hasn't changed. The manager hasn't changed. The company hasn't changed. But the meaning has changed. And meaning has a powerful influence on how we experience work. However, there is a danger here. Cognitive crafting should not become self-deception. If your workplace is genuinely unhealthy, if your manager treats you bad, if the workload is permanently unreasonable, if your values fundamentally conflict with the company, then telling yourself, I just need to think more positively is probably not job crafting. Sometimes the right form of job crafting is preparing to leave. Positive thinking should not mean denying reality. For me, living positively means something different. It means asking, what is within my influence? and then using that influence. That distinction is important. This idea also makes me think about engineering. Engineers rarely receive perfect systems. We receive systems with constraints, limited budgets, existing infrastructure, old machines, technical requirements, deadlines, standards, legacy software, customer requirements. And then we ask, within these constraints, what can we optimize? Maybe we should sometimes approach our working lives in exactly the same way. You don't control the whole system, but perhaps there are parameters you can adjust. Your relationships, your skills, your tasks, your routines, your interpretation of your contribution, your network, your way of communicating, your area of expertise. These are the parameters of your working life. And job crafting means consciously adjusting some of them. There is also an interesting culture question here. I sometimes wonder whether we have become too focused on finding the perfect job. Especially in wealthy societies, we have many choices. And choice is wonderful, but choice can also create dissatisfaction. Because every job can be compared with another possible job. Maybe another company pays more, maybe another company has more home office, maybe another position has a better title, maybe another industry is more exciting. Maybe another manager would appreciate me more. And suddenly our current job is competing against hundreds of imaginary alternatives. Social media probably makes this even stronger. We constantly see other people's promotions, new job, new offices, new opportunities. But we rarely see the boring Tuesday afternoon when that same person is sitting in a meeting they don't want to attend. Every job contains frustration, so perhaps the question should not always be, where can I find the perfect job? Perhaps another useful question is, how can I make this job better? And I think this applies far beyond work. It is almost a philosophy of life. We spend lots of time thinking about changing our circumstances. A bigger house, a different city, a different job, more money, more free time. And sometimes those changes are absolutely worth pursuing. But there is another skill, learning how to work with life we already have. That doesn't mean becoming passive. Actually, it means the opposite. Job crafting is active. You look at reality and say, okay, this is my current situation. What can I create from it? I like that idea because it puts some responsibility back into our own hands without pretending that everything is under our control. So, how could you actually start? I think you can begin with three simple questions. First, which parts of my job give me energy? Not which parts are easier. Which parts actually make you feel engaged? Maybe solving technical problems, talking to customers, organizing projects, teaching people, building something, analyzing data, negotiating, writing, programming, presenting, connecting people. Try to identify those moments. Then ask, how can I create slightly more of them? Not 50% more, maybe 5% more. Second, which relationships make my working life better? Who do you learn from? Who gives you energy? Who challenges your thinking? Who makes you laugh? Who shares your professional interests? And then ask, am I investing enough in those relationships? Sometimes a better working life starts with something surprisingly simple. Having coffee with someone, going for lunch, calling instead of sending another email, joining a professional network, helping a colleague, asking someone for advice. These things sound small, but careers are often built through small interactions repeated over many years. And third, Why does my work matter? This can be difficult, especially when you are uh, deep inside Excel files, meetings, emails, specifications, or project plans. But try to follow the chain. Who eventually benefits from what you do? Of course, there are some customers somewhere, or perhaps a patient, a factory worker, or perhaps a technician, a passenger, a family, another engineer, or simply your colleagues because your work allows them to do their work better. Meaning doesn't have to be heroic. You don't have to save the world every morning before lunch. Sometimes meaning is simply, I make something work better than it worked yesterday. For an engineer, I think that's actually a pretty good purpose. And there is one final point that I find important. Job crafting should not become another optimization project. We already optimize enough. Productivity, sleep, fitness, finances, careers, time, and now perhaps even happiness. That can become exhausting. The goal is not to wake up every morning asking, have I successfully optimized my professional happiness today? Sometimes work is simply work. Some days are interesting, some days are frustrating, some days are boring. That's normal. Job crafting is not about creating permanent happiness. It is about gradually moving your working life a little closer to the person you are, your strengths, your interests, your relationships, and your values. Perhaps that is also one of the broader ideas I want East meets Swiss to explore. East meeting West, engineering meeting philosophy, career meeting life, ambition meeting contentment. Because I don't think living a positive life means always wanting more. And I don't think it means simply accepting everything either. Perhaps it exists somewhere between those two extremes, appreciating what we have while still shaping what we can. And maybe that's exactly what job crafting teaches us. You don't necessarily need to wait for someone else to design the perfect job for you. Your manager won't always do it, your company won't always do it, and your job description certainly won't do it too. But within the boundaries of your role, there may be more freedom than you think. A conversation, a new skill, a different task, a relationship, a new perspective on why your work matters. Small changes. But repeated over months and years, small changes can become something much bigger. They can become a career and perhaps even a more positive life. So, tomorrow, when you start working, don't immediately ask yourself, is this the right job for me? Try asking something smaller. What is one thing I could change that would make this job slightly more mine? Maybe that is where your job crafting begins. And maybe a better working life doesn't always start with finding another job. Sometimes it starts with looking differently at the one we already have. Thank you for listening to East Meets Swiss. And I'll see you in the next episode.